Hello and welcome to Tabletop Vulture. I'm your host, Dr. Nicholas William Moll. Tabletop Vulture is a space where we talk about tabletop role-playing games from an academic standpoint. And this combines two great passions of mine. On one hand, I am a freelance game designer for places such as Our Man Press. On the other hand, however, I am also a holder of a doctorate in literature from the University of Ballarat. So really, this is a space where I combine my academic viewpoint with my love of role-playing games. This is our first episode of Tabletop Vulture, and it's also the first in a 5-part series where we talk about one particular feature of role-playing games, humans. So over the next 5 episodes, that's going to be our topic. Episode 1 is titled Humans, Part 1, Invoking Human Qualities. Alright. So, largely, when we start talking about humans in tabletop role-playing games, we think about them in the context of dwarves, elves, trolls, orcs, and other choices of character race. And one of the most, largely interesting features of humans in role-playing games from an academic standpoint is also the one I find most boring in terms of a player option. And as I say, humans are often constructed or pegged as a default or middle-of-the-ground choice for players to undertake. For example, page 6 of the 2007 Savage World Explorers Edition notes, and I quote, "Humans are the standard race in Savage Worlds, and start with one free edge," end quote. So for those of you who have played Savage Worlds, you know that an edge is something that every character gets during character creation to give them a little extra, oomph, beyond basically just bare stats of such as traits or skills. So to give humans an extra edge seems to indicate that humans aren't really particularly good at anything, but at the same time they're also good at everything. Similarly, the 4th edition of Shadowrun also does this, attributing humans the meta-type ability, i.e. the racial attributes to, drop the Shadowrun ease, the kind of things that Shadowrun uses to describe how different races are, different. But humans, however, get the meta-type ability of +1 edge. So again, much like Savage Worlds, humans are both good at everything and good at nothing. Similarly, Pathfinder offers humans as a race a +2 bonus in any attribute of the player's choice, and a free feat, again following the pattern that we saw with Shadowrun and Savage World Explorers Edition. Although if you want to technically go in chronological order, Pathfinder being D&D derivative, it's Shadowrun and Savage Worlds following the patterns established by D&D. So Pathfinder offers humans as a race a +2 bonus in any attribute of the player's choice and a free feat. Something that I have not actually, seen articulated very well in many roleplay games, is extending beyond humans as a non-player character. So really only humans as a player choice. In contrast, however, to this middle-of-the-ground approach, what most studies of what it is to be human attribute very specific rather than closely generic qualities to human. In this sense, the 1954 study by Hadley Cantrill, tongue-tied there for a second, The Qualities of Being Human, outlined 4 factors that Hadley argues constitute the qualities of humanity: motivation, environment, choice, and faith. We'll explore each of these qualities in turn, beginning with motivation. Of motivation, Hadley writes, and I quote, "We can begin this inquiry by proposing a working definition of life. We shall define living as a process in which an organism participates in the creation of an environment through which it can carry out its purposes. This definition, I believe, gives us a general specification applicable to the bird building its nest and the salmon returning to the river, as well as the human being, whether child or adult, participating in the multifarious transactions of living." In this sense, then, Hadley frames motivation in terms of instinct and purpose. That is to say, in terms of being interested in doing certain activities. Furthermore, Hadley frames those activities in terms of altering or constructing an environment, the world around us. And this really leads us to Hadley's second quality of being human, the environment. Having shaped the environment to their purposes, Hadley outlines that the environment itself then shows signs of ordering and classification. And that ordering and classification in itself outline the significance of different objects through ideas communicated with symbols. And if you think about, like, I guess, roads are a fantastic example of an ordering of the environment through symbols and communicating those ideas through that ordering through symbols. You know, stop, go, red light, green light, orange light. You know, prepare to stop, you can go now. In particular, actually, if you think about, I guess, here in Australia, I am Australian, by the way, if the accent didn't give it away. Often it doesn't. In Australia here, for instance, road signs, you know, may have maybe a yellow triangle turned on its side to a diamond, so not actually a triangle at all, but a diamond. Maybe a yellow diamond with a picture of a kangaroo on it. And this indicates an area where kangaroos tend to cross. And even though it's not the explicit intent of that particular road sign, it also tells you that creatures of that type live around this area. Hadley's third motivation, then, is choice. And while Hadley, you know, he shows the style of writing in his day and age, and entering into questions of free will, I'm not even going to explore or touch those. I'm going to ignore those for our discussion today. Linked back, though, to motivation environment, Hadley argues choice shows a motivation from intent to outcome. For example, I intend to run a game of Vampire the Requiem. Therefore, I reread the Chronicle of Darkness core rules. My reading shows my intent, and it's linked clearly to an outcome. And this ties back to motivation and environment in that sense. But it also leads us to faith, Hadley's fourth quality of being human. And it's not really a religious faith that Hadley talks about here, linked to any sense of the divine or any particular religious notion. Rather, it's faith in the sense of assumption that certain intents and the actions that follow them are linked to particular outcomes, and that those outcomes are attainable, that they're reachable, that you can actually get there. To return to our previous example, for instance, I read the Chronicles of Darkness core rules because I intend to run a vampire game. And I believe my intent will become manifest next Thursday night when my gaming group meets. If I did not make this assumption, then I might delay or abandon the reading, since it is no longer linked to a perceived event. In terms, then, of tabletop role-playing games, Hadley's classification of this self-driven, thinking creature that alters their environment in a meaningful manner, and that you can follow the meaning of that manner, fits the description of, well, let's face it, every player race in any tabletop game, and many non-player creatures as well, from elves to mind flayers and beyond. It's not simply something that's attributed just to humans, particularly well if you think about D&D monster manuals. There are so many free-thinking, environment-altering humanoids. I mean, what is the problem with orcs, if not the fact that they change the world around them in a manner that most people don't actually like? The question then becomes, however, what is human in the context of so many other clearly human entities? If it's simply a player race choice, or it's sentient creatures in general to think about mind flayers again, then this is a highly problematic idea. Or rather, it's not an idea at all, since the limits of what either can be, I guess, human or not human, are as broad as the imagination, extending to as near as attributing human qualities to monsters, and as far as attributing them to abstract concepts. If you think about 4th edition players, and I do actually have a really soft spot for 4th edition. If you think about the 4th edition race of the Shard Mind, a piece of crystal from a gate, right? It's a piece of crystal from a gate. That's a very abstract idea to have. Human qualities. Essentially, you're saying that the garden gate or the footpath gate down the front of my house is as human as the guests, as the people who come to play D&D with me. And for those of you who ever sat down and played a game of Big Damn Sci-Fi with me, you know full well I may make sentient colours. Sentient, free-thinking colours that can interact with the environment. Why is that patch of red on the wall holding a gun at me? Think about that for a moment. More provocatively then, the idea can be reversed and used to deny human status simply by writing certain traits out of a narrative. Imagine an alternate history setting that uses something like 4th edition D&D with maybe the ultra-modern rules, and you could do it with 5th edition as well, or D20 modern. But still, or Savage Worlds, pretty much any role-play game, actually. Imagine an alternate history setting that denies one particular ethnicity, class, nationality, sexual identity, or other group their free edge or feat for being human. Likewise, simply stating that within tabletop role-playing games that feature humans and then human-like but not human player race options or monstrous creatures or species, whatever they're called in that particular game, simply stating that those create a metaphor for real-world race relations is an equally problematic thought. I.e. that, elves and dwarves and whatnot all stand in for some sort of real-world allegorical ethnicity or group in the manner that, say, if you think about Star Trek and its relationship to the swashbuckling adventure tales and the naval narratives drawn from Horatio Hornblower, people arguing, well, are the Vulcans or, Klingons or such and such like, say, the French or the Spanish? Do they occupy that role in the narrative world? Centauri in Babylon 5 do that paint French imperialist aspect, painfully overtly, but simply stating that they're allegories for real-world race relations is a problematic thought. This is because the way in which the majority of humans have been represented to date in tabletop roleplay games as a baseline for the setting, but also a baseline that is both European and predominantly white, heterosexual, and patriarchal. And this creates an idea of a baseline normality, and a baseline normality that is essentially white, heterosexual, Christianized, European, from which everything else is extracted or differentiated. And suggests then also, by extension, that stereotypes are accurate. After all elves get +2 dexterity, making them good archers by default. And moreover then, the prominence of white, heterosexual, human, Western patriarchies has been challenged in recent years in tabletop role-playing games. Thinking here of examples such as LJP Design's female African-American iconic samurai for the Neo-Exodus campaign settings, specifically I think for Crisis of the World Eater. I'm sure Lewis will email and correct me or something if I'm wrong on that. But in that sense then, human and being human must mean something in tabletop role-playing games, distinct from being an elf, a dwarf, a half-orc, or other racial choice. And it's not simply a case that, the new approach, the more recent approach that we've seen emerging in recent years, overrides the decades from the 1970s forwards of existing imagery. Rather, thanks to the resurgence of retro-designed games such as Labyrinth Lord, and the conversion of older products to ebooks for digital publishing sites such as the Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Masters Guild, which currently I think holds, the entire backlog of old TSR D&D supplements in PDF form. Thanks to the retro design and the rise of digital publishing sites for older materials, the more recent innovations, such as the LJP design African American iconic samurai example, share market space. The newer images share market space with existing examples. And within this grand milieu, to extend David R. Dietrich's study of whiteness in massively multiplayer online games, non-human races such as elves, dwarves, and orcs are at once both human and something other than human, occupying a contested space between the two. And it is this idea that we'll pick up in our second episode. For now, however, let's simply state that within tabletop role-playing games, human denotes both a biological species and cultural traits. This has been the first episode of Tabletop Vulture, our first part of a 5-part series on humans in tabletop role-playing games. I've been your host, Dr. Nicholas William Moll. Thank you very much for listening. Catch you all.